The courtroom was so silent you could hear heartbeats. Precious stood at the front, calm, composed, dressed in white, looking nothing like the girl they had once forced to sleep in the storeroom of her own mother's house. Beside her stood her husband, the man they had called a poor farmer, the man they had laughed at, the man they had thrown her at like leftover food. Behind them, 3 lawyers, a team of accountants, and documents, exposed bank statements, land papers, and medical reports that were about to unravel 15 years of lies, theft, and murder. On the other side of the courtroom sat her father, Mr. Richard Mensah, sweating through his expensive suit. Beside him, his second wife, Gloria, gripping her handbag like a lifeline. And next to Gloria, her daughter, Vanessa, the girl who once poured water on Precious's head and told her she was born to be a servant. None of them were laughing now. The judge adjusted his glasses and spoke. Based on the forensic toxicology report submitted to this court, the death of Mrs. Beatrice Mensah was not natural. This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with charges of... Gloria screamed. Richard collapsed into his chair. And Precious? Precious didn't flinch. She had waited 12 years for this moment. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back to when Precious was just 2 years old and her father looked at her mother's wealth and made a decision that would set everything in motion. Prepare yourself. This is a story of a stunning empire, a murdered mother, and a daughter who learned to wait. Some betrayals don't come with noise. They come with a smile, a promise, a love that looks real until it isn't. They silenced her, they sidelined her, they underestimated her. But while they played their game, she watched, she learned, and she waited. Because when the time finally comes, she won't beg, she will stand. This is Echoes of Wisdom. Stay with me. Beatrice Owusu was not just wealthy, she was built differently. By the age of 28, she owned a textile company that supplied fabric to 3 West African countries. She had a frozen food distribution company, she had real estate, 7 properties across the city, and she had done all of this with her own hands, starting from a small market stall her late mother left her when she was 19. Beatrice was beautiful, hardworking, and deeply kind. The kind of woman who paid school fees for children in her village. The kind of woman who gave loans to market women and told them to pay when they could. The kind of woman who believed that if you loved people genuinely, they would love you back. That belief was her only flaw. She met Richard Mensah at a business dinner. Richard was charming, tall, well-spoken. He wore fitted suits and had a smile that could convince you the sky was green. He told Beatrice he ran an import business. What he actually ran was a series of failed ventures and a mountain of debt that he had been running from for years. But Beatrice didn't know that. She saw a man who looked her in the eye and told her she was the most remarkable woman she had ever met. She saw a man who opened doors for her, called her every morning, and never once asked about her money. At least, not directly. Richard was patient. He studied Beatrice the way a hunter studies prey. He noticed what made her smile, he learned what made her feel safe, and within a year, he had become so embedded in her life that when he proposed, every friend and family member said, "This man truly loves you." They married in a ceremony that the whole city talked about. Beatrice paid for everything, but Richard insisted on handling the planning, which meant he chose the venue, the caterer, and made sure every important person in the city saw him standing next to her. He wasn't building a marriage, he was building a reputation. Within 2 years, Beatrice gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Precious because she said after everything she had worked for, this child was the most precious thing God had given her. She would hold Precious in the delivery room, tears in her eyes, and whisper, "Everything I have built is for you. You will never struggle the way I struggled. I promise you that." Richard stood beside her, smiling. But his eyes were not on the baby. They were calculating, because he had already done the math. Beatrice's empire was worth more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. And now that there was a child, he had to think long-term. What Beatrice did not know, what she would never find out in her lifetime, was that 4 months before Precious was born, Richard had already begun sleeping with another woman. Her name was Gloria. Gloria Peters was everything Beatrice was not. Loud where Beatrice was calm, scheming where Beatrice was trusting, and hungry in a way that went beyond ambition. Gloria had met Richard at a bar. She knew he was married. She didn't care. When Richard told her about Beatrice's wealth, Gloria's eyes changed. And from that moment, she wasn't just Richard's mistress. She was his partner. They began to plan. Not immediately, they were patient. Gloria told Richard, "Don't be stupid. Don't ask for money. Don't change anything. Just stay. Be the perfect husband. Let her trust you with everything. And when the time is right, we take it all." Richard followed the plan perfectly. When Precious was 2 years old, Gloria gave birth to a daughter. They named her Vanessa. Richard hid the pregnancy, hid the birth, and hid the child. Gloria raised Vanessa in a rented apartment on the other side of the city, and Richard visited every week, telling Beatrice he had business meetings. For 16 years, Richard played the role of devoted husband. He brought Beatrice flowers, he attended parent-teacher meetings for Precious, he sat beside Beatrice at church every Sunday with his Bible open, nodding when the pastor spoke about faithfulness. And every month, every single month for over a decade, he added a small amount of a slow-acting toxic substance into Beatrice's evening tea. Not enough to kill her quickly, not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to weaken her organs slowly, gradually, over years, so that when she finally fell ill, it would look natural, like her body simply gave up. Gloria supplied the substance. She had a cousin who worked in a pharmaceutical warehouse, and she obtained it in small quantities, never enough to be traced. Beatrice began to feel tired in her early 40s. Doctors couldn't find anything specific. They said it was stress, overwork. They told her to rest more. She listened. She slowed down. She delegated more of her business to managers and to Richard, who was all too happy to help. By the time Precious was 16, Beatrice had become a shadow of herself. The woman who once commanded boardrooms now spent most days in bed. Her skin had lost its glow. Her appetite was gone. But even in her weakness, she did one thing that would change everything. She called her lawyer. Not the family lawyer that Richard knew about. A different one. A woman named Mrs. Helen Kwati, who Beatrice had known since university. Beatrice sat in Helen's office, thin and pale, but with sharp, clear eyes, and said, "Helen, I don't know what is happening to my body, but I know one thing. I don't trust my husband." Helen was stunned. "You've never said that before." Beatrice looked down at her hands. "I've never been this weak before, and the weaker I get, the more comfortable he seems. He doesn't look worried, Helen. He looks like he's waiting." Helen leaned forward. "What do you want to do?" "I want to protect my daughter. Everything I own, every company, every property, every account, I want it in Precious's name, not Richard's. He gets nothing. And if something happens to you, especially if something happens to me. But here is the condition. Precious is too young now. She's only 16. I don't want anyone manipulating her. She must not receive anything until she turns 30. Old enough to understand, old enough to fight. And who manages the asset until then?" Beatrice closed her eyes. This was the part that kept her up at night. "Richard, as guardian. He's her father. I can't exclude him entirely without raising suspicion. But the will is clear. He manages, he does not own. And the moment Precious turns 30, everything transfers to her automatically. He cannot sell, he cannot transfer, he cannot dissolve any of my companies. He can only maintain them." Helen nodded slowly. "You know he'll try to find a way around this." Beatrice smiled, a tired, knowing smile. "That's why I'm sitting in your office and not his." The will was drawn up, signed, and locked in Helen's personal vault. Richard knew nothing about it. 2 years later, when Precious was 18 years old, Beatrice Owusu-Mensah died in her sleep. The doctor said organ failure, multiple systems. They said it was rare, but not unheard of. They offered their condolences and signed the death certificate. Richard wore black for 6 months. He cried at the funeral, real-looking tears that convinced everyone. Precious stood beside him, shattered, holding on to her father because he was all she had left. She didn't know that the hand holding hers was the hand that had killed her mother. 3 months after the funeral, the will was read. Richard sat in that room expecting to hear his name, expecting to inherit an empire. Instead, he heard, "All assets, properties, businesses, and financial holdings belonging to the late Mrs. Beatrice Owusu-Mensah are hereby bequeathed in their entirety to her daughter, Precious Mensah, to be transferred upon her 30th birthday. Mr. Richard Mensah shall serve as guardian and custodian until such time, with no authority to sell, transfer, or dissolve any holdings." Richard's face didn't change. He nodded respectfully. He thanked the lawyer. But inside, something dark turned darker, because he had just been told that he had spent 16 years poisoning a woman and he still didn't own a single thing. He had 12 years. 12 years before Precious turned 30 and everything slipped away from him. 12 years to figure out how to keep her weak, dependent, and unable to claim what was hers. That night, he called Gloria. "Pack your things. Bring Vanessa. You are moving in." Gloria smiled on the other end of the phone. Finally. And just like that, the second phase began. Precious was standing in the living room when they arrived. She was 18, still wearing grief on her face like a second skin, still sleeping in her mother's room because the scent on the pillows hadn't faded yet. And there was Gloria, walking through the front door with suitcases, and behind her a 15-year-old girl with long braids and an expression that said she already owned the place. Precious looked at her father. "Dad, who are these people?" Richard didn't even look at her. "Gloria is moving in. She'll be helping around the house. And this is Vanessa, your sister." The word hit Precious like a physical blow. "My what?" "Your sister. She's my daughter. She's been living with her mother, and now she's here. This is their home too." Precious opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at Gloria, who was already examining the furniture with hungry eyes. She looked at Vanessa, who stared back with a smirk that said, "I knew about you long before you knew about me." That night, Precious locked herself in her mother's room and cried until her body ached. She didn't know that this was the last night she would be allowed to sleep in that room. The transition happened fast, not in weeks, but in days. Day 3, Gloria moved into the master bedroom. Beatrice's clothes were packed into garbage bags and sent away. Her perfumes, her photos, her jewelry, gone. Gloria replaced everything with her own things and told Richard, "I can't sleep surrounded by a dead woman's energy." Day 5, Precious came home from an errand to find Vanessa in her room, her childhood room, lying on her bed, wearing her clothes, going through her things. When Precious objected, Vanessa looked at her with the coldest expression a 15-year-old has ever produced and said, "Daddy said this is my room now. Yours is the small one at the back, near the kitchen, so you don't have to walk far when you're cooking." Precious ran to Richard. She was crying, shaking, expecting her father to fix this. Richard looked at her with eyes she had never seen before. Not cold exactly, but empty. Like he was looking at a stranger. Like the 18 years of pretending had been so exhausting that now that Beatrice was gone, he simply couldn't be bothered to act anymore. "Precious, Vanessa is your younger sister. She's a child. She needs a proper room. The back room is fine for you. Don't create problems where there are none." That was the moment Precious understood that something fundamental had shifted. Her father was not the same man. Or more accurately, he was finally showing her who he had always been. By the end of the first month, the structure was established. Precious cooked, Precious cleaned, Precious did the laundry, by hand, because Gloria said the washing machine was only for the family's clothes. Precious swept the compound, Precious mopped the floors. Precious ironed Gloria's dresses and Vanessa's school uniforms. Precious woke up at 5 a.m. and didn't sit down until 11 p.m. She was a maid in her own mother's house. And if she didn't do something correctly, if the food was too salty, if the floor wasn't shiny enough, if Vanessa's uniform had a single crease, Gloria would stand over her with her arms crossed and say things designed to cut to the bone. Look at you. Your mother thought she was so great building all this, and what did she produce? A girl who can't even fry an egg properly. Maybe if she had spent less time in boardrooms and more time training you, you would be useful. Precious would stand there, fists clenched, jaw tight, eyes burning, but she wouldn't cry in front of Gloria. She made that decision early. She would never give this woman the satisfaction of her tears. She cried alone, in the small back room, on the thin mattress they gave her, with the single window that faced the generator house. She would press her face into the pillow and whisper to her mother, "Mama, I don't understand. Why did you leave me with them? What did I do?" No answer ever came. Vanessa, meanwhile, was growing into a particular kind of cruel. She wasn't physically violent, she was strategic. She humiliated Precious in ways that left no marks but deep wounds. When Precious served food, Vanessa would taste it, make a face, and push the plate onto the floor. "Pick it up and make it again. I don't eat food made by the help." When guests visited, Vanessa would introduce herself as Mr. Mensah's daughter and introduce Precious as the house girl. And Richard would sit there, watching, sipping his drink, saying nothing. The worst moments were the quiet ones, when the house was still and Precious was alone in the kitchen, and she would look through the window at the living room where Vanessa sat on the couch Beatrice had chosen, eating snacks and watching TV, and Gloria sat beside her braiding her hair, and Richard sat in his armchair reading a newspaper, and they looked like a family, a complete family. And Precious realized she wasn't just excluded from this picture, she had been erased from it, as if Beatrice had never existed, as if Precious herself was just furniture. Yet, somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the exhaustion and the humiliation, something in Precious refused to break. She enrolled herself in university. She told Richard she needed an education, and Richard, after a long pause, agreed. Not out of love. He agreed because he knew a girl with no degree would be easier to dismiss later. He assumed she would struggle, fail, and come back even more defeated. He underestimated her. Precious studied business administration. She chose it deliberately because she remembered sitting on her mother's lap as a child, watching Beatrice review spreadsheets and asking, "Mama, what are all those numbers?" And Beatrice had smiled and said, "These numbers are our future, my love. One day, I'll teach you what they mean." Beatrice never got the chance, so Precious taught herself. She went to lectures with no breakfast in her stomach. She studied in the library because the back room had no desk lamp. She wore the same 3 outfits in rotation because Gloria had taken most of her clothes for Vanessa. And she graduated at 23 with first-class honors. Nobody came to her graduation. She walked across that stage, collected her certificate, and sat alone on a bench outside the auditorium. No family, no flowers, no photos. She held the certificate in both hands and whispered, "Mama, I did it." And then she went home and cooked dinner. Now, this is where things escalated. Precious was 23. She had 7 years before she turned 30. 7 years before her mother's inheritance would transfer to her. And she had a degree, a weapon, a way out. She began applying for jobs.
What she didn't know was that Richard was watching. He had always been watching. And the moment he saw Precious printing resumes at the internet cafe, he made phone calls. Richard still had connections, people who owed him favors from when he used Beatrice's money to fund their projects. He called them one by one. "If a girl named Precious Mensah applies to your company, reject her. I don't care about her qualifications. Find a reason." And they did. Precious applied to 14 companies in 2 years. 14. She was qualified for every single one. She got rejection after rejection. Some didn't even grant her interviews. Others interviewed her, told her she was impressive, and then never called back. She couldn't understand it. She had the grades, she had the drive, she presented herself well, but every door slammed in her face, and she never knew that her own father was the one locking them. By the time she was 25, Precious had stopped applying. Not because she had given up, but because she was exhausted. The applications, the rejections, the housework, the abuse, it was crushing her slowly. Gloria noticed the defeat in her eyes and smiled. Richard noticed it and relaxed. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Let me tell you about Henry Osai. And I need you to pay attention, because this man is not what anyone in this story thought he was. Henry grew up in a farming community about 4 hours outside the city. His father was a cocoa farmer, a real one, who worked the land with his bare hands and taught Henry that there was no shame in soil under your fingernails. When Henry was 15, his father died, left him 30 acres of farmland and a mother who looked at him and said, "Henry, this land is all we have. What are you going to do with it?" Henry didn't answer with words. He answered with work. He woke up at 4 a.m. every day. He studied agriculture from books he borrowed from the district library. He experimented with crop rotation, soil treatment, irrigation. He failed many times. He lost harvests. He went hungry. But he kept going because he had made a promise to his mother. And Henry Osai was not a man who broke promises. By the time he was 25, those 30 acres had become 60. By 25, 60 had become 200. He didn't buy the extra land with inherited money. He earned it, season by season, harvest by harvest. At 28, Henry made his first major business move. He secured a supply contract with 3 of the largest supermarket chains in the country. Fresh produce, vegetables, fruits, grains, delivered weekly. The contract was worth more in a single month than most people in his village earned in a year. By 30, he had expanded into cocoa export. He built processing facilities on his own land. He partnered with international buyers from Europe and Asia. His cocoa was premium grade, organic, and in demand. The export business alone generated more revenue than some publicly traded companies. By 32, the time of this story, Henry Osai was by every financial measure extraordinarily wealthy. But here is what made Henry different from every rich man in this story. You would never know it by looking at him. He didn't live in a mansion. He lived in a modest, well-built house near his farm, comfortable but not flashy. He didn't drive luxury cars. He drove a pickup truck that he used for deliveries and farm work. He didn't wear designer clothes. He wore clean, simple outfits, well-fitted, neat, but nothing that screamed money. This was not an act. This was who Henry was. He had watched men like Richard his entire life, men who wore wealth like a costume, who used money to control people, who measured their worth by how much they could display. Henry found it repulsive. He believed that a man's value was in what he built, not what he showed, and he built quietly, steadily, and without apology. He had one indulgence, his mother. Henry's mother, Mrs. Margaret Osai, lived in the city. Henry had bought her a beautiful house, not excessive, but warm and comfortable, and he visited her every month without fail. Every visit, he brought fresh food from the farm, baskets of vegetables, yams, fruits, freshly processed cocoa powder, smoked fish from his fish ponds. He loaded them into his truck himself and drove 4 hours to deliver them to her doorstep. And it was during these monthly trips that he began delivering to the Mensa household.
The arrangement was simple. Richard, always looking for ways to appear important, had set up an account with a premium farm supplier to deliver fresh organic food to the house every month. It was one of those small luxuries he funded with Beatrice's money. The supplier was Henry's company, though Richard had no idea who owned it. To Richard, it was just a service, and the delivery man was just a farmer. The first time Henry pulled up to the Mensa house in his truck, wearing work boots and a simple polo shirt, carrying crates of produce on his shoulder, Gloria looked at him from the balcony and turned to Vanessa. "See, that's what happens when you don't go to school. You end up carrying food for other people." Vanessa laughed. Richard barely acknowledged him. He signed the delivery slip without looking up and waved Henry toward the kitchen. But Precious was in the kitchen when Henry walked in. She was washing dishes. Her hair was tied back, her dress was faded, and her hands were wrinkled from the water. She looked up when she heard the footsteps and saw a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, carefully setting down a crate of tomatoes. "Good afternoon," Henry said. "Where should I put the rest?" "Oh, here, let me help you," Precious said, drying her hands quickly. No, they're heavy. Just show me where." Something about the way he said it, not dismissive, not commanding, just considerate, made Precious pause. She was so used to being ordered around that simple courtesy felt foreign. She showed him the storage area. He made 3 trips, carrying everything himself, organizing the crates neatly without being asked. When he was done, he looked around the kitchen, at the mountain of dishes, at the 3 pots on the stove, at Precious standing alone in the middle of it all, and something flickered across his face. Not pity, understanding. "You do all this by yourself?" he asked. Precious stiffened. She was used to that question being followed by mockery. "Yes," she said quietly. Henry nodded. No judgment, no commentary. He just said, "The tomatoes on top are the ripest. Use those first. The ones at the bottom will last another week." Then he left. Precious stood there for a moment, holding a wet plate, replaying the interaction. It was nothing, a 30-second conversation about tomatoes, but it was the first time in years that someone in this house had spoken to her like a person. Henry came back every month, and every month their conversations grew, just slightly, never forced, never rushed. He would tell her about the farm, how the rainy season affected the harvest, how the chickens escaped their coop again, and how his mother complained that he brought too much food. Precious would laugh, a real laugh, not a performance, and Henry would notice the way it changed her face, like sunlight breaking through something heavy. He began to look forward to the deliveries, and he began to notice things that bothered him. He noticed that Precious's clothes were always the most worn in the house, while Vanessa wore new outfits every month. He noticed the way Gloria spoke to her, sharp, cutting words thrown casually like stones. He noticed that Precious was always working, always moving, always the last to sit and the first to stand. He noticed the small burns on her hands from cooking, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched when Richard raised his voice in the other room. Henry Osei was a patient man, but patience does not mean blindness. Now, there was another man in this story, and this is where the threads start to tangle. His name was Daniel Ajeman. Daniel lived in the same estate as the Mensah family. He drove a Range Rover, wore tailored suits, and had the kind of confidence that comes from spending money you don't actually have. He was a house of cards in designer shoes. Daniel had noticed Precious, not because of her situation, he didn't know about her inheritance, but because Precious was genuinely beautiful, even in her faded house dresses, even with exhaustion written on her face. There was something about her that stood out, a quiet dignity, an elegance that could not be hidden by circumstance. Daniel began to find reasons to be near the Mensah house. He would wave at Precious when she was sweeping the compound. He would stop his car when he saw her walking and offer her a ride. He called her queen and told her she deserved better than what he could see she was going through. Precious was cautious. Life had taught her that. But she was also starving for attention, for someone to see her. And Daniel, for all his flaws, made her feel visible. The problem was that Vanessa had also noticed Daniel. Vanessa, now 22, fashionable, loud, and used to getting everything she wanted, saw Daniel's Range Rover, his clothes, his swagger, and decided that he was hers. She began showing up wherever Daniel was. She wore her tightest dresses. She laughed at everything he said. She posted photos near his car on social media, as if they were together. But Daniel's eyes kept drifting to Precious, and everyone could see it. The day it became a crisis was a Saturday afternoon. Daniel had come to visit the Mensa house, supposedly to see Richard about a business opportunity, which was really just a way to be near Precious. He was sitting in the living room when Precious came through carrying a tray of drinks Gloria had ordered her to serve. Daniel looked at her and smiled. "Precious, you look beautiful today." It was a simple compliment, but Vanessa was sitting right there, and the look on her face, the sudden tightening, the flash of rage, was something Precious recognized. It was the look Gloria gave before something bad happened. That evening, after Daniel left, the explosion came. Vanessa stormed into the kitchen where Precious was washing dishes. "What are you doing with Daniel?" "I'm not doing anything with, don't lie to me. I saw how he looked at you. I saw you smiling at him like some desperate Vanessa. He said one sentence to me. I was serving drinks. That's what you and your mother make me do. I served drinks." Vanessa stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than shouting. "Listen to me carefully. Daniel is mine. If I see you near him again, if I even hear that he mentioned your name, I will make your life in this house so much worse than it already is. And believe me, dear sister," she smiled, "it can get worse." Vanessa reported to Gloria. Gloria reported to Richard, and that night, around the dining table, while Precious stood in the kitchen listening through the door, the three of them had a conversation that would change the course of her life. "This girl is becoming a problem," Gloria said, cutting her meat. "A rich man is showing interest in her. If she marries well, she'll have resources, she'll have support, she'll start asking questions about her mother's properties." Richard stopped chewing. "She is 25. She turns 30 in 5 years. 5 years, Richard. What happens then?" Richard set down his fork. "Everything transfers to her, automatically. The companies, the properties, the accounts, all of it." Silence. Vanessa looked between them. "So we just let her take everything?" Gloria smiled, the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. "No. We make sure she's in no position to take anything. We make sure she's so buried, so broken, so dependent, so trapped that by the time she turns 30, she won't even know how to spell inheritance, let alone claim one." "How?" Richard asked. Gloria leaned back in her chair. "What about that farmer? The one who brings the food every month, the one with the dirty truck?" Richard frowned. "The delivery man?" "Yes, he's a nobody. He probably earns just enough to feed himself. If we push Precious toward him, if we convince her it's her only option, she'll be stuck in some village somewhere cooking on firewood and fetching water with no money, no connections, and no way to fight us." Vanessa grinned. "And I can have Daniel." Gloria reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Exactly, my love." Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Do it." And the plan was set in motion. They didn't force it crudely. They were more strategic than that. They started by increasing Precious's workload, making her life even more unbearable. Then Gloria began dropping comments. "You know, that farmer who comes here, he's a decent-looking man. You could do worse. At least he would feed you." Vanessa joined in. "Maybe that's your level, Precious. A farmer's wife. Some people are just born for that life." Richard, playing the concerned father. "Precious, I've been thinking. You've been struggling with jobs. Maybe you need a different kind of life. Something simpler. That farmer, Henry, he seems like a hard-working man. Not rich, but honest. Maybe you should consider it." They pushed from every angle. Every day. A comment here, a suggestion there. A reminder of her failures, a comparison to Vanessa's success. And Henry? Henry had been coming to the house regularly, and his feelings for Precious had grown quietly and genuinely. He hadn't said anything, he wasn't the type to rush, but he had begun bringing small extras with his deliveries. A jar of honey from his farm, fresh herbs he thought she might like, a small bag of the best cocoa powder he produced. "For your tea," he would say simply. Gloria saw these gestures and laughed. "See? Even the farmer wants her. Match made in heaven, the house girl and the delivery boy. What Gloria didn't know, what none of them knew, was who Henry Osei actually was. To them, he was a man in work boots who drove a truck. They never asked about his business, they never asked about his land, they never even asked his last name. He was invisible to them, the way all people they considered beneath them were invisible. And Henry, for his part, never corrected them. It wasn't deception. Henry simply didn't believe in announcing himself. He had walked into boardrooms with CEOs who wore less on their wrists than his annual export revenue. He had sat in meetings with government ministers who didn't know the quiet man across the table was their biggest agricultural contractor. He didn't hide his wealth, he just didn't perform it. And people like the Mensahs could only see what was performed. One afternoon, Henry was making his delivery when he found Precious sitting on the back steps of the house, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red, not from crying, she had trained herself out of that, but from exhaustion. Pure, bone-deep exhaustion. He sat down beside her, not too close, just near. "What happened?" he asked. Precious was quiet for a long time. Then, "They want me to marry you." Henry blinked. "They who?" "My father, Gloria, Vanessa. They think if I marry a farmer and disappear, I'll never be able to. It doesn't matter. They want me gone, and you're convenient." She said it flatly, not cruelly. She wasn't trying to insult him. She was too tired for pretense. Henry absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment, turning it over. "And what do you want?" he asked. Nobody had asked her that in 7 years. Precious looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, the armor she wore every day cracked just slightly. "I want to stop being tired. I want to sleep in a room that doesn't smell like generator fumes. I want to eat a meal I didn't have to cook for people who hate me. I want someone to be kind to me. Just kind. That's all." Henry didn't make promises. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just reached into his truck, pulled out a small bag of fresh strawberries, a rare thing, something he grew in a small section of his farm, and handed it to her. "These just ripened yesterday. Try them." Precious took one, bit into it, and the sweetness of it, the unexpectedness of something beautiful in the middle of all this ugliness, made her eyes fill with tears she hadn't planned on. Henry looked away to give her privacy, and in that small moment, something shifted between them. 2 weeks later, Precious told Richard she would marry the farmer. Richard could barely contain his satisfaction. Gloria clapped her hands. Vanessa laughed out loud. "Finally," Vanessa said, "the house will smell better without her." There was no wedding, no celebration. Gloria said, "We are not wasting money on a ceremony for someone marrying a farmer." Richard gave Precious a small bag with a few of her belongings, not even all of them, and told Henry to take good care of her. He said it with a straight face, a father sending off his daughter, as if he hadn't spent years slowly dismantling her life. Precious climbed into Henry's truck with the small bag on her lap. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't cry. Vanessa stood at the window, waving mockingly. Gloria stood at the door, arms crossed, already planning how to redecorate Precious's back room into a storage closet. Richard stood in the driveway, watching the truck disappear, and thought, "That's done. She will rot in some village and never come back." He was wrong. He was catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. The drive was 4 hours long, and for the first hour, neither of them spoke. Precious sat with her bag on her lap, watching the city turn into suburbs, the suburbs turn into smaller towns, and the smaller towns turn into stretches of green that seemed to go on forever. She had prepared herself for poverty. She had told herself, "At least he's kind. At least he won't hit me. At least I'll be away from them. I can survive poverty. I've been surviving worse." When they turned off the main road onto a well-maintained private road, smooth tarmac, not dirt, Precious frowned slightly but said nothing. When they drove past a gate, a proper gate with a security post, she sat up a little straighter.
When the road opened up and she saw the land, hectares of it stretching in every direction, organized into sections of crops, orchards, greenhouses, and livestock enclosures, she stopped breathing. There were workers, dozens of them, moving between rows of crops, operating machinery, loading trucks, not just one or two people struggling on a small plot, but a full-scale industrial agricultural operation. "Henry, what is this?" Henry glanced at her, then back at the road. "This is the farm." "This is your farm?" "Yes." Precious pressed her face closer to the window. She saw a cocoa processing facility, a real building with real equipment. She saw cold storage units. She saw a fleet of delivery trucks, not just the one he drove, but 8, 10, 12 trucks lined up with his company logo on the sides. "Henry, how big is this?" He paused, calculating. "About 1,200 acres now. We just acquired another 60 last quarter for the new cocoa seedlings." Precious turned to look at him. Her mouth was open. Henry continued as if he was discussing the weather. "The produce section supplies about 43 supermarkets in the city. We export cocoa to 6 countries: Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Japan, 2 buyers in the UK. The livestock section handles poultry and cattle, about 5,000 birds and 300 head of cattle. We are building a new fish farm down by the river. Should be operational in about 4 months. Precious couldn't speak. "I also own the transport company, the trucks. That's a separate business. And there's a small agro-processing plant we are building in partnership with the government. Should create about 200 jobs for the local community when it's finished." The truck pulled up to a house. Not a mansion, Henry was not that kind of man, but a beautiful, well-built home. Modern, clean lines, a large veranda with flowers and fruit trees, solar panels on the roof. Henry got out and walked around to open her door. Precious sat frozen. "Henry." "Yes?" Are you rich?" Henry thought about it genuinely, as if the question required careful consideration. "Comfortable." Precious let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Comfortable? Henry, you have 1,200 acres?" 1,200. She stared at him. He stared back. And then, for the first time in years, Precious laughed. A real full, uncontrolled laugh that came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place she thought had been permanently sealed. Henry smiled. It was the first time he had seen her laugh like that, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. He reached for her bag, but she held on to it. "Wait, I need to understand something. My father, Gloria, they think you are poor. They think you are a delivery boy. They think they were throwing me away by sending me to you." "I know." "And you didn't correct them?" Henry shrugged. "People see what they want to see. If a man walks in wearing work boots and carrying a crate of tomatoes, they decide who he is. I don't waste energy changing minds that are already closed." He looked at her directly. "But I need you to hear me clearly, Precious. I didn't marry you because of whatever game they are playing. I've been coming to that house for over 2 years. I've watched how they treat you. I've seen your strength, your patience, the way you carry yourself under pressure that would have broken most people. I married you because you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I need nothing from you except the chance to prove that." Precious's chin trembled. She stepped out of the truck, stood in front of this house, this impossible, unexpected house, and pressed her hands to her face. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying because for the first time in 7 years, someone had chosen her.
Not to use, not to control, not to diminish, but to love. Henry stood beside her, patient as always, and waited until she was ready. Then he picked up her bag, walked her inside, and showed her a home that had been prepared for her. A bedroom with real sheets, a closet he had built himself, a kitchen stocked with everything she could ever need. On the bedside table, there was a single jar of honey and a note in Henry's handwriting. Welcome home, Precious. The first month was an adjustment. Precious kept trying to clean, to cook, to serve, because it was all she knew. Henry would find her scrubbing floors at 6 a.m. and gently take the brush from her hands. You don't have to earn your place here. This is your home. You live here. You don't work here. It took weeks for her body to understand that it was safe, that she could sit down without being yelled at, that she could eat without serving everyone else first, that she could sleep past 5 a.m. without consequences. Henry was patient through all of it. He never rushed her. He never made her feel broken. He simply created space, safe, consistent, quiet space, and let her feel it at her own pace. They talked for hours about everything, about Beatrice, and when Precious described her mother, Henry listened with such focused attention that Precious felt for the first time that her mother's memory was being honored. She sounds extraordinary, Henry said. She was. She built everything from nothing. And Precious stopped. She hadn't told him about the inheritance yet. She hadn't told anyone. Henry waited. And then it poured out. Everything. The will, the properties, the companies, the condition, everything transferring at 30. Richard as guardian, the blocked jobs, the sabotage, the deliberate systematic effort to keep her powerless. She told him all of it, sitting on the veranda as the sun set over 420 acres of farmland, and when she was done, Henry was silent for a long time. Then he said, "When do you turn 30? "In 5 years. "Then we have 5 years to prepare." He looked at her with an expression she had never received from anyone. Not pity, not anger on her behalf, but partnership, strategy, respect. Precious, your mother didn't just leave you an inheritance. She left you a weapon, and she set the timer at 30 because she knew you would need time to become strong enough to use it. She was protecting you, even from the grave. Precious stared at him. "But I have no experience. I have no connections. I don't know anything about running companies." "You have a first-class degree in business administration that you earned while being treated like a slave. You are your mother's daughter, and you now have 5 years, a husband who runs a multi-million-dollar agricultural operation, and every resource you need. We don't just prepare for your birthday, Precious. We prepare for war." That night, Precious slept a full 8 hours for the first time in 7 years. And the next morning, the work began. Henry hired a private business consultant, someone he trusted, to begin teaching Precious the details of corporate management. Not textbook theory, real operations, how to read a company's financials, how to identify mismanagement, how to conduct audits, how to fire people who needed to be fired and hire people who deserved to be hired. But Precious didn't just study the books. She began to study the very air Henry breathed. She noticed a quiet leak in the farm's finances, a small, steady drain that everyone else had accepted as the unavoidable cost of large-scale agriculture. Henry had a long-standing contract with a middleman named Mr. Kwateng.
Kwateng was a man who wore silk shirts that struggled to contain his ego and drove a luxury SUV that he treated like a throne. He handled the cocoa exports for our 1,200-acre estate, and every month he reported a 7% loss due to transit spoilage. Henry, focused on the soil and the trees, trusted the reports, but Precious didn't.
One Tuesday, while Henry was away in the city, Kwateng pulled up to the loading docks to sign off on the month's losses. He expected to see a submissive farmhand he could intimidate. Instead, he found Precious. She was standing on the dock with a tablet in one hand and a thermal sensor in the other. "The refrigeration in those trucks hasn't fluctuated once in 400 miles, Mr. Kwateng," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the idling engines. "And according to the moisture sensors inside these bags, not a single bean is spoilt." Kwateng laughed, that oily, dismissive laugh Precious knew so well from her father. "Listen, girl, I've been doing this since before you were born. Sometimes the paperwork just reflects reality differently. Move aside." Precious didn't move. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with a cold, analytical precision. "I've already sent the real-time sensor data to the shipping line and the European buyer," she said calmly. "If you sign for a 7% loss today, you will be signing a digital confession of insurance fraud. The choice is yours. Deliver the full count or explain the discrepancy to the port authorities." Kwateng froze. 10 years ago, he had once sat in a boardroom across from the great Beatrice Owusu, and for a split second, looking at the fire in this girl's eyes and the iron set of her jaw, he felt a cold shiver of recognition. He didn't know who she was. He didn't even know her name, but he knew he was no longer dealing with a house girl. He was dealing with a master of the game. He backed down. He signed for the full shipment. That night, when Henry returned, he found an extra $12,000 in the digital ledger. He looked at the numbers, then at Precious, and then back at the numbers. He didn't ask how she did it. He simply took her hand. "You didn't just save the shipment, Precious," he whispered. "You just told the world you are back." It was the first crack in the wall the Mensahs had built around her. And for the first time, Precious realized she didn't just want her inheritance back. She wanted the throne. Precious absorbed everything like water into dry earth. She was hungry for it. She studied her mother's companies from a distance, using public records, market data, and legal filings that Henry's lawyers helped her access. What she found made her sick. Richard had been running Beatrice's companies into the ground, not deliberately destroying them. He was too greedy for that, but siphoning money steadily, funneling contracts to Gloria's relatives, inflating expenses, and pocketing the difference. The textile company that once supplied 3 countries now barely covered 1. The real estate properties were being rented at below market rates to people who paid Richard under the table. The frozen food company had lost 2 of its 3 major clients. Her mother's empire was bleeding, and in 5 years, at this rate, there would be nothing left to inherit. "We need to move faster," Precious told Henry one evening, spreadsheets covering the dining table. "We will, but we move smart, not fast. If Richard suspects you're watching, he'll accelerate the destruction. We build our case quietly, document everything, and when the time comes, we don't just reclaim what's yours, we make sure he never touches it again." Precious looked at her husband, this man in work boots and a simple shirt, who was calmly helping her plan the reclamation of a business empire, and felt something she hadn't felt since her mother was alive: safe. Meanwhile, back in the city, things were not going as smoothly as the Mensah household had expected. Vanessa got her wish. She got Daniel. With Precious gone, Vanessa threw herself at Daniel with everything she had, and Daniel, who had lost interest in Precious the moment she left the estate, turned his attention to the only woman still available. They began dating. Vanessa posted everything on social media: the dinners, the gifts, the trips. She was living the life she had always wanted: a rich boyfriend, a big house, no competition. What she didn't know was that Daniel's world was collapsing. His debts had reached a critical point. The people he owed money to were not patient people.
The Range Rover was leased and the payments were 3 months behind. The apartment he claimed to own was rented and the landlord was preparing eviction papers. The business he talked about at parties didn't exist. Daniel needed money, and when Gloria casually mentioned during a dinner that the Mensah family controlled significant assets, Daniel's interest in Vanessa shifted from romantic to strategic. He proposed within 6 months. Gloria was ecstatic. Richard was pleased. Vanessa was over the moon.
See, Gloria said to Richard that night, our daughter is marrying a wealthy man, and Precious is rotting on a farm somewhere. This is how it should be. The wedding was extravagant. Richard paid for everything, with Beatrice's money, of course. Vanessa wore a custom dress. There were 300 guests, a live band, imported champagne. It was the most expensive party Richard had ever thrown, with money that didn't belong to him. 3 months into the marriage, Daniel's creditors came calling. Not with phone calls, with visits. Men showed up at Vanessa's new apartment demanding payments, threatening, making it clear that the consequences of non-payment would be physical. Vanessa called Richard screaming, Daddy, Daniel owes people money, a lot of money. They came to the house. Richard confronted Daniel, who broke down and admitted everything. The cars, the lifestyle, the business, all fabricated. He was millions in debt, and the interest was compounding daily. Gloria's face when she heard the news was something no one in the room would ever forget. The woman who had orchestrated the removal of Precious so that Vanessa could have the good life now stood in a living room watching her daughter's perfect marriage dissolve like sugar in rain. Richard had no choice. He began using Beatrice's assets, the ones he was supposed to be guarding, to pay off Daniel's debts, selling properties below value, liquidating investments, draining accounts. The empire was being consumed not just by his greed anymore, but by the greed of the man his daughter had married. And nobody was watching, except Precious. Precious and Henry were watching every single transaction. Henry's lawyers had set up a monitoring system. Every sale, every transfer, every withdrawal from Beatrice's account was tracked and documented. Every irregularity was flagged. Every illegal transaction was recorded. Precious sat in Henry's home office one evening, reviewing the latest report, and her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from fury. He sold the textile factory. Mama built that factory with her own hands. She started it from a single sewing machine, and he sold it for a fraction of its value to pay off the debt of a man who married Vanessa for money, the same way he married Mama for money. She looked at Henry. It's a cycle. He did to Mama what Daniel is doing to Vanessa, and none of them see it. Henry placed his hand over hers. They'll see it. When the time comes, they'll see everything. The 5 years passed. Precious used every single day. She didn't just learn business, she mastered it. She walked alongside Henry, learning operations from the ground up. She managed sections of his farm. She negotiated with suppliers. She traveled with him to export meetings and held her own in rooms full of men who underestimated her family had. She also did something else, something deeply personal. She hired a private investigator. Not to follow Richard. She already knew what Richard was doing. She hired the investigator to look into her mother's death. It took 3 years. 3 years of medical records, interviews with former staff, tracking pharmaceutical supply chains, and one crucial breakthrough. A former employee of the pharmaceutical warehouse where Gloria's cousin worked came forward and confirmed that small quantities of a specific substance had been systematically removed over a period of years, quantities consistent with slow, deliberate poisoning. The investigator presented his findings to Precious,
on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She read the report twice. Then she closed the folder, placed it on the desk, and sat in absolute silence for 20 minutes. Henry found her there. He didn't ask what was wrong. He saw the folder, he saw her face, and he sat with her in silence until she was ready. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I want them to pay, not just for the money, not just for the inheritance, for her, for my mother. I want them to answer for what they did to her. Henry held her gaze. Then we make sure they do.
Precious turned 30 on a Wednesday. No party, no announcement. Just a quiet morning on the farm, coffee with Henry, and a phone call to Mrs. Helen Kwate, her mother's lawyer, the woman who had kept Beatrice's will safe for 12 years. Helen, it's time. I've been waiting for this call for a very long time, Precious. Happy birthday. The legal process was initiated immediately, and it hit the Mensah household like a freight train. Richard received the notice on a Thursday afternoon, a formal legal letter stating that as of Precious Mensah's 30th birthday, all assets, properties and holdings of the late Beatrice Owusu Mensah were to be transferred to their rightful owner immediately. An independent audit had been requested. All custodial authority held by Mr. Richard Mensah was hereby revoked. Richard read the letter 3 times. Then he called Gloria. They are coming for everything. Who's coming? Precious. She has lawyers, real lawyers. They're demanding a full audit. The color drained from Gloria's face. An audit? Richard, an audit will show. I know what it will show. For the first time in their partnership, Richard raised his voice at Gloria because the audit would show everything. The stolen money, the sold properties, the diverted contracts, years of systematic theft documented in black and white. Richard scrambled. He called his own lawyers, men who had helped him with quiet, unethical maneuvers for years. They looked at the case and told him the truth. Mr. Mensah, the will is ironclad. Mrs. Kwate drafted it with the specific intent of making it unbreakable. And if they have documentation of asset mismanagement during your custodial period, sir, we strongly advise you to consider settling. Settling? She's my daughter. Sir, with respect, that may be the least of your problems if they push this further. Richard didn't understand what the lawyer meant. He was about to. The court date was set. Precious arrived not in Henry's truck, but in a convoy. 3 cars, a legal team led by Mrs. Helen Kwate and supplemented by 2 of the most respected corporate attorneys in the country. Attorneys Henry had retained. Forensic accountants, a private investigator. Precious walked into that courtroom wearing white. She had chosen the color deliberately. Her mother had worn white on the day she signed the will. Helen had told her that. Richard sat on the other side. He had aged badly. The stress, the drinking, the years of looking over his shoulder had carved deep lines into his face. Gloria sat beside him, clutching her handbag, dressed expensively in clothes bought with Beatrice's money. Vanessa was there too, but she looked different from the girl who used to mock Precious from the window. Daniel's debts had consumed their lifestyle. The designer clothes were gone. The arrogance was muted. She sat quietly, nervously, like someone who knew the ground beneath her was about to open. The proceedings began with the audit. The forensic accountants presented their findings, property by property, account by account, transaction by transaction. Every naira Richard had stolen was documented. Every property he had sold was identified. Every contract he had diverted was traced back to Gloria's relatives. The numbers were devastating. Over the 12-year custodial period, Richard had depleted approximately 70% of Beatrice's estate. The courtroom murmured. Richard's lawyer attempted to argue that the expenditures were necessary for the maintenance of the family, but the evidence showed luxury purchases, international trips, payments to Daniel's creditors, and transfers to Gloria's personal accounts. Helen Kwate stood up and addressed the court with the quiet devastation of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. Your Honor, my client's mother built an empire from nothing.
She trusted her husband to protect it. Instead, he dismantled it. But the financial theft, as severe as it is not the most serious matter before this court today. The room went silent. I would like to submit to the court a forensic toxicology report prepared by an independent medical examiner, alongside a sworn statement from a pharmaceutical warehouse employee and a detailed timeline of procurement of a controlled substance over a period of approximately 14 years. Richard's face went white. Gloria's hand froze on her handbag. Helen continued. This evidence suggests, and we believe it will conclusively demonstrate, that the death of Mrs. Beatrice Owusu-Mensah was not due to natural organ failure, as stated on her death certificate. It was the result of deliberate, systematic poisoning carried out over more than a decade using a substance administered in small doses, likely through daily consumption of tea prepared by her husband. The courtroom erupted. Richard stood up. That is a lie. That is... Sit down, Mr. Mensah. The judge's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Richard sat. Gloria was trembling. Her eyes darted to the exits. 2 court officers moved closer to the doors. They had been briefed. The judge reviewed the submitted evidence in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then he spoke. Based on the forensic toxicology report submitted to this court, in conjunction with the procurement records and the sworn witness statement, this court finds sufficient evidence to refer this matter to the Criminal Division for investigation into the death of Mrs. Beatrice Owusu-Mensah. Charges of suspected homicide, conspiracy, and fraud will be formally recommended. Gloria screamed. It was not a scream of anger. It was a scream of recognition, the sound a person makes when they realize the game is over and there is nowhere left to run. Richard collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Vanessa sat frozen, mouth open, looking between her mother and the man she had believed was a loving father to Precious. The realization of what her mother and Richard had done, the full horrific scope of it, hit her in that moment. She had been complicit in tormenting a girl whose mother was murdered by the people raising her. She began to cry. Not performative tears, real ones. The kind that come when you understand, too late, that you are a weapon used against an innocent person. The judge continued. Regarding the civil matter of the estate of Mrs. Beatrice Owusu-Mensah, this court orders the immediate and complete transfer of all remaining assets to the rightful heir, Miss Precious Mensah Osei. Furthermore, Mr. Richard Mensah is ordered to provide a full accounting of all assets sold or transferred during his custodial period, and restitution proceedings will commence to recover any assets obtained through fraudulent means. He looked at Richard. Mr. Mensah, you are entrusted with the legacy of a woman who gave you everything. You responded by taking her life and stealing her life's work. This court has no tolerance for such betrayal. He turned to Precious. Miss Mensah Osei, your mother's estate, what remains of it, is yours. This court hopes you will honor her memory with the same strength and integrity that built it. Precious stood. Her voice was steady. I will, Your Honor. She turned and looked at Richard. Not with hatred, not with triumph, with something worse, something Richard felt in his bones. She looked at him with nothing, complete emptiness, as if he had ceased to exist. Then she turned to Henry, her husband, the poor farmer, the man they had thrown her to like garbage, and Henry took her hand and they walked out of that courtroom together. Behind them, Richard was led away by officers for questioning. Gloria was arrested in the corridor, still screaming, still clutching her handbag as if it could save her. And Vanessa sat alone in the courtroom, surrounded by empty chairs, understanding for the first time in her life what it felt like to have everything taken away. But Beatrice built an empire that refused to stay buried. Armed with the court judgment, Precious went after every stolen kobo. The textile factory, the sale was declared fraudulent. Gloria's brother was given one choice, return it or face prison. He returned it. Property sold cheap, Buyers were told, give back the titles or be prosecuted for receiving stolen assets. They give them back. Bank accounts emptied. Every withdrawal was traced. Richard and Gloria were ordered to repay. When they couldn't, their houses, cars, jewelry, everything they owned was seized and sold, and the forced restitution moved asset by asset until the ledger itself reflected the pressure of the court's orders.
During this period, Precious continued to rebuild control with steady, documented steps, tightening reporting lines so the companies could not be pulled apart again. Within 2 years, she had clawed back almost 90% of what they thought was lost forever. The warehouse floors, machinery lists, and deed packets became real again under her watch, reclaiming not only paper ownership but operational continuity. 6 months after the trial, she stood in the boardroom of that same textile company her mother had started with one sewing machine. The room had been neglected, chairs covered in dust. A whiteboard still carried numbers written in Beatrice's handwriting from years ago. Precious ran her fingers across them and left them there. She turned to the table. Around it sat her new team: managers, accountants, strategists, every one of them handpicked by her and Henry. She looked at them and said, "My mother built this company with a dream that her daughter would never struggle the way she did. For 12 years, it was stolen, starved, and nearly killed. Starting today, we don't just bring it back, we make it bigger than she ever imagined." Within 2 years, the textile company was not just running again, it was expanding. The frozen food company was relaunched stronger than ever. Properties were renovated, leases signed at full market value, and every asset that could be recovered was recovered. Precious didn't just inherit an empire, she resurrected it, and this time her name was on every single document. She also did something her mother would have been proud of. She created a foundation, the Beatrice Owusu Foundation, that provided scholarships to young women from difficult backgrounds, funded small business loans for market women, and supported agricultural communities in partnership with Henry's farm. Henry continued to do what Henry did best: build quietly, love fiercely, and wear work boots to board meetings just to watch people underestimate him. Their first child, a boy, was born a year after the trial. They named him after Henry's father. Their second child, a girl, came 2 years later. They named her Beatrice. One afternoon, about a year after the trial, Precious received a letter. It was handwritten on cheap paper, and the handwriting was shaky. "Dear Precious, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I want you to know that I didn't know about your mother. I didn't know what they did to her. That is not an excuse for what I did to you. The cruelty, the humiliation, the years of treating you like you are less than human. I did those things. I chose to do them, and I have to live with that. I am alone now. I have nothing, and I understand for the first time what it feels like to be exactly where they put you, to be invisible, to be discarded, to be someone the world looks through. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for money. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I want something from you, because you deserved to hear it a long time ago. Vanessa." Precious read the letter twice. She folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She didn't respond immediately. The wounds were too deep, too real, too recent. Forgiveness is not a switch, it's a road, and Precious was only at the beginning of it. But 6 months later, she made a decision. She didn't reach out to Vanessa directly. Instead, she instructed the Beatrice Owusu Foundation to offer Vanessa a place in their skills acquisition program. No special treatment, no VIP status, just a seat in a classroom with other women rebuilding their lives. Vanessa accepted. They didn't speak for another year. When they finally did, at a foundation event, surrounded by women who had overcome impossible circumstances, it was brief. Vanessa looked at Precious and said,
quietly, "Your mother would be proud of you." Precious looked back. "I know," and that was enough. Some people are thrown into the fire because the world believes they will burn. But some people, some rare, extraordinary people, walk through the fire and come out carrying the flames. Precious Mensah Osei didn't just survive what they did to her. She outlasted it, she outgrew it, and she turned every weapon they used against her into a tool for building something greater. Her mother left her an inheritance, but the real inheritance wasn't the money or the companies. It was the lesson that a woman who knows her worth doesn't need the world to confirm it. If this story moved you, if it made you want to stand up and cheer, then do me a favor, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone is living in their own version of that back room, and they need to know that the story doesn't end there. This is Echoes of Wisdom by Crystal, and I'll see you in the next story.